Well, hello everybody. Welcome back. Jiu-Jitsu 2000 here today. I'm back and I've got an interesting video for you today. I want to talk about Alone. I want to talk about season 5 and I want to talk about episode 7. This is Desperate Measures. This is Alone Redemption. So if you haven't seen this episode, I highly recommend that you turn this video off. It will contain spoilers, and as always, I don't want to ruin your Alone experience. So with that being said, let me go ahead and get started. Now the quote comes across the screen and it says, "Redemption can be found in hell itself if that's where you happen to be." This was by Lynn Jensen. So let's get started. We are on day 29. There's 5 people left. It's about 7:30 roughly in the morning. We're starting off with Dave. He caught a grouse, and the whole time he's been out here in Mongolia, this is his 7th grouse. And he feels good about this one because it was, I'm getting the feeling that it was a clean kill because his spirits are up about this grouse. The shot showed him holding it and it had an arrow through, so I'm getting the feeling that he's happy about this kill. And he makes mention that he's really starting to feel fatigue. You know, again, this is because of lack of calories, lack of food. You know, they've been out there, let's not forget, it's on day 29. So the big bird, I forget what they call it, but there was another bird that he went after in a previous episode. It started with the letter C. I can't remember what the name of that bird was. Big, up to 9 pounds. But he's trying to decide a way where he can catch or kill that bird as a, you know, to get a clean kill on it. So, and he's afraid of using his bow. He's thinking that his bow might be not effective enough or whatever, so he decides to make an Atlatl. Now, I thought, man, that is so smart. You know, there's a very prominent survival expert that I really look up to, and that's Matt Graham. And Matt Graham is constantly talking about the Atlatl, how effective it is. It's basically a piece of wood that you put your fingers through. It's got like a little handle here, and you put 2 fingers through, and it's got a little hook at the end, and you put your arrow up there, and you use this to get mechanical leverage to increase the speed of your darts or your arrows. This technique of Atlatl, according to the annotation that comes on the screen, said that they've been using this for over 17,000 years. The Atlatl, it's a very ancient type of, you know, way of throwing arrows. The arrows are thick too, and they're larger, and they're long arrows, like 5 or 6 feet long. And they say that an Atlatl can produce an average speed of 100 miles per hour of the arrow. One thing that I noticed when he was carving that kind of worried me a little bit was he was bringing the blade of his knife towards his chest instead of cutting away from himself. Obviously nothing happened with him, but it did raise my attention to the fact of his knife technique. I got a little nervous about that because on day 29 your skills and, you know, your motor reflexes and stuff like that aren't as good as they are on day 1. So in my opinion, bad technique could lead to potential of an injury, which I don't think that's going to happen to Dave. He's a really smart guy, but it still raised my awareness. So let's move forward. Let's talk about Randy. It's 9:53 in the morning, and he heard some bugling last night from what they call red deer. I think it's elk. And, you know, there was a little annotation that came on the screen, said something to the effect that elk make a bugling noise when they're in rut, you know, in the fall, they're trying to mate. And, you know, a thought came across my mind, because Randy was kind of talking about how the elk might have been, you know, telling the ladies, "Hey, come on over here, girls," or whatever. And the thought that came across my mind was the elk's telling the female, the cows, they're telling them, "Hey, let's have some Netflix and chill," you know. So anyway, he decides to go fishing, He's feeling the lack of energy, just like I mentioned, with Dave. Again, it's day 29, so no calories or not sufficient amount of calories. So they're really starting to break down a little bit, and they're starting to feel this. And so he was hand fishing with a bottle. He had a glass bottle. He had the string wrapped around it, and he was throwing it out there, and it was very effective for him. He lost a couple of fish, but then he started to hit, and he started catching some fish, which is very, very good. Very, very good. He caught a total of 9 fish, and he basically said something to the effect of, when I get finished with dinner tonight and breakfast tomorrow, I'll have 5 fish left, which will give me 10 halves if I smoke them. So pretty smart. He's still got his mental together. He's still doing good. So let's move forward. We're going to talk about Larry now. Actually, yeah, it's about 11 o'clock at night, still on day 29, and it's dark out, and he hears something. He's laying in his bed, and he hears something, and he said it kind of scared him. The noise, the sound, it kind of made him nervous. It kind of scared him, and he said that he thinks that it could be a boar. Now, those Mongolian boars, they can get big. Boars, it's not uncommon to see them get upwards of 400 or 500 pounds. They're huge, huge animals. So let's move forward. Day 30, we're about 8:42 in the morning. We're still talking about Larry. So he decides to go check a large deadfall that he put together on day 22, and it's heavy duty. I mean, he's trying to kill something large. These poles that he used are huge, and it looked like a very smart setup. It looked like a very effective, potentially deadly deadfall that could be used. But he noticed that his bait was still there. The trap wasn't sprung or anything like that. And one thing that I noticed in the background of that scene with Larry was the fall colors. You can really start to see the leaves turning yellow and things like that. So definitely temperatures are dropping, and all the participants, I'm noticing the same thing in their footage. The leaves are changing colors. Let's move forward. It's about 10:50 in the morning. We're talking about Sam. He had just washed his socks, and they were off of a line drying, and he put them on, and he was talking about how they felt like they were fresh off the dryer. Really good, good foot hygiene, good to keep your feet clean and not stinking and stuff like that. So he decides to go check a fish trap that he made, and he hasn't caught a fish yet. Listen to that. Sam has not caught a fish yet in Mongolia. Man, not one. So he goes and checks out this fish trap that he made, and he finds leeches in the trap. And he wasn't sure if he could eat them or not, so he chose not to eat them. Let's move forward. A little bit after 1 o'clock, we're talking about Larry. So he had a small deadfall. He goes and checks it, and he nailed a mouse. He had a mouse under it. And he said at this point, all he thinks about out there is food. And he decided to work on a net. And so he took the inner strands of the paracord, 7 inner strands, and he took a piece of willow and made a loop, and made, he started making this net on day 23. It's now day 30, so he's been working on building this net for like 7 days. And then he's talking about how he's tired of the heat, he's tired of the wind, he's tired of the weather. And then an annotation comes on the screen, and it said that winds are not uncommon to reach speeds, gusts of 70 miles an hour in Mongolia. Now again, I said this in a previous episode that I come from an area, Winslow, Arizona, and it's a very windy area. Amarillo, Texas, they have a lot of wind. So we're kind of used to that. But Larry, I don't think he's used to the wind, but it's really making him mad. It's kind of upsetting him, and he's angry about the weather and stuff like that. So moving forward, about 3 o'clock, he finishes his net. And it looks nice. It's a good size net. The diameter of the net opening is large, and he's got a big capacity of the net. It looks very good. So he decides to go down to the water, to the river, and see, to test out his net. Who wouldn't? That's what I would do. And luckily, he catches a fish. And he said it's a grayling. It's a very, very fat one. And of course, he's really happy. He's excited. That's food. And he's got a lot of things to be proud of, and he kind of mentioned it briefly. Everything that he's got out there in Mongolia, his net, his fishing pole, his shelter, everything that he's got out there, he's built. Just like everybody else, you know, everything that they're doing, and, you know, to sustain food and making fire and all that, they put together on their own. So he's real proud about that. I would be too. Let's move forward. About 3:52. Let's talk about Dave. And he says, and he's sitting in his shelter. The scene opens up, and he says, anyone who does not have fire in their shelter is crazy. It's getting cold, he says. And then I saw an annotation somewhere out there that said that the temperatures are around 39 degrees, which, you know, it's almost freezing. So he decides that he wants to try to focus on, instead of getting these smaller game, but he wants to try to get one big kill. So he, like I mentioned in a previous episode, he wants a smaller amount of loss of life, but more food. So he's going to decide to hunt deer. So one thing that he talks about is making a deer stand. I thought that was very smart. A deer stand gets you up. You have a higher perspective. You can see things, and deer don't tend to look up too much. So you're harder to be seen. You're up, so your scent is kind of blowing up higher. It's harder for them to smell you, harder for them to see you, and you have a good vantage point for hunting. So I thought that the tree stand idea was very, very smart. And one thing that he mentioned was that he's 50 years old, and it's a little bit dangerous climbing up in those trees to make that triangle, you know, that he's going to be lashing those poles to. And they show some footage of him building this thing, you know, footage that he had caught. And it looks, from my point of view, and based on the height of how tall he is, it looks like the tree stand itself is, I'm going to say, between 15 to 20 feet tall up. So that's perfect. He's doing a good job. Let's move forward. Day 31. 7:42 in the morning. Britt decides to go fishing. He said it's very cold outside, 39 degrees, and he hasn't caught anything. He's talking about the temperatures are getting colder and that the fish are probably going to deeper waters, right? Where the water's warmer and they're less active because of the cold water. Let's move forward. About 10:49 in the morning, we're talking about Randy, and he mentions it as well. His opening scene is talking about it's getting colder. He noticed that there was a lot of frost on the ground this morning, and fish aren't biting. So he decides to go look for grouse. And during his little hike, he had his bow, you know, and I'm guessing he had the GoPro on his head or something, because it had kind of a shot of him holding the bow with the arrow. And he says that he got within about 5 feet of a grouse, but didn't get a shot. And so then he mentions that his family, for the last, I think he said 7 years, they've been putting in for elk or deer. I don't remember which one he said it was, but in either case, it doesn't really matter what type of animal, but they got drawn this year. So he's mentioning that his family at this time is out probably hunting. So he decides he's going to do the same thing. He says, I'm going to go out, try to get some large game. That's what my family's doing. You know, we're going to be doing the same thing. I'm in Mongolia. They're in wherever they live, Utah, I think. And so he decides to go try for large game. Very, very smart. Day 31, let's keep moving forward, talking about Britt. And he's so short on food that he's getting a little bit desperate in the effect that he's eating the dried skin of the fish. And he said he's talking about it's getting cold. He's in his shelter, and then there's an annotation that comes on the screen that says it's 33 degrees. So they are just about freezing. That's crazy. And then there was another thing that came on the screen that talks about shivering, and it was very effective. What they mentioned was that shivering burns calories. It's burning energy. So unnecessary shivering is bad when you don't have food. So you really need fat. That's quick energy, right? So let's move forward. Day 32. 32. Talking about Sam. and he talks about not getting enough food. He needs fish, so he decides to make a gill net. I thought that was smart. Of all the participants that have went on season 5, Alone Redemption, only one person that I'm aware of brought a gill net, and that was Nicole. And I thought she was very smart to do that. So here I'm thinking, you know what? Larry was smart for making a net. Now Sam's smart because he's thinking on a gill net, you know, type of thought. Very smart. And it shows the net that he made. It looks nice. If you guys haven't seen my video where I made a net, check it out. Search my channel. I've got a really cool net video. In fact, I'll try to put the link to the description box down below. So he's talking about the fact that he's starving, and he's mentioning that. But from my point of view as a viewer, as an armchair quarterback, I can see that Sam still has some body fat on him. So I'm thinking he's going to be good for a little longer. So he decides to go set the gill net, and he weighs it down with some stones. And the stones looked a little small for the current that the river has. I was kind of wondering how that would turn out. It turns out that it didn't work too good. The stones were too small. The current was too strong. And my thought was perhaps an idea might have been to use a pole on the bottom of the net and secure the net to the pole, and then put some rocks on the side of the pole to keep it down, some heavy rocks. I don't know if that would have worked or not, but that's one of the approaches that I would have probably thought of. But I'm not on day 32, and I'm not on starvation mode, so my mind is clear right now. I don't know, I might have put stones on it too. When you're that far and you're that calorie deprived, thought process doesn't work sharp like it does, like I am right now. So let's keep that in mind. So he gets desperate. He's really needing some calories. He's really needing some food. So he makes the decision to cook the leeches. He had 9 leeches and a snail. He mentioned boiling them for 5 minutes, but then he put a wire through them and roasted them, and he said they taste terrible. There was an annotation on the screen that said the sliminess of the leeches causes a gag reflex. And he did too. He's kind of like, he was having a hard time getting it down. Looks nasty. Looks terrible. Things are starting to get desperate. I'm looking forward to the next episode. I think we're going to see some exciting stuff. That's it for this episode. I want to say thank you guys for joining me. I'm trying to keep this short. I hope you got some good, useful information out of this video. Please feel free to leave your comments down below. Stay positive. Let me know what you're thinking about the show. And we'll see you next time. Take care. God bless. I love you all. Bye-bye.